welcome to another Unity from Scratch tutorial. In this tutorial I'm going to show you how to use height maps that you can edit in Photoshop to set the height of your terrain. So to begin with, I've got a terrain object that I've added into a 3D environment by going right click, 3D object and terrain, and we get our large terrain there. Now I've zoomed out in the scene view, but I haven't yet aligned my camera. So to look at the terrain in the same way as we're looking at it in the scene, select camera and game object align with view. And now we can get a better view of what's going on in the game view. So first of all, to edit a height map, which is a two-dimensional image, we need to get the right format. Now, I always find that the best way to do that is to get the height map that's already on the terrain and edit that actual file. That way you know you've got the right file format. So this terrain is flat, so its image is going to be empty anyway, or at least it's going to be completely like black, because black is the lowest part of any terrain. And you'll see this in a moment when I open it in Photoshop. So to grab our height map, click on terrain, and then go over to the cog settings button for the terrain, and down the bottom you can actually export raw for the height map. So click on that and you can export it in the version that you get here. I find that even if byte order says Windows, that I am fine editing that on a Mac. So I just take the default settings here. So export that and it'll ask you where to save the file. And you can save it on, I usually put it on the desktop so I can find it, and save. Okay, and that will give you a file called terrain.raw on your desktop. Here's the raw file opened up in Photoshop. So it's all black, indicating that the altitude on this height map is 0, right at sea level. Now you can't go any lower than that. A height map is made up of values of grey in colour, going from black all the way through to white, where white is the highest point of your terrain. Now exactly what that highest point is a value that you set inside Unity, but it will spread out those grey values between black and white for the different heights across that scale. So if I'm to take this black image and draw, say, a white line across it like this, it would indicate a very sharp edged high mountain, because there's no gradient between the white and the black. So let's just have a look at what that looks like. So if I just save that back to the same file, and then we go back to Unity and we import the raw image. So click your import raw button on your terrain. Then find that image, which we saved on the desktop, and we called it terrain raw. Open it up. Now at this point, it will want to know the size and everything, which should still be okay. The only thing you'll need to do is set this byte order to Mac if you're actually on a Mac. And this is the only setting I've found that I need to change when I'm importing. Now this is the terrain size. It's 500 by 500 in its width and depth. The actual height of it is set to 600. So anything that's white will be at 600 and anything that's black will be at 0. So let's go import. And now we can see the result of creating that terrain. And it's pretty harsh. There's the white line that we drew across that image. And here's our steep sides, because it goes in the image from white straight to black. So there's no gradient going on in there. And you get that. Okay, now that's just for illustrative purposes. It's obviously not going to work as a proper terrain. So let's go back to Photoshop and fix that up. Okay, so in Photoshop we've got our image, and we're going to apply a filter over the top of it, which will use the Perlin Noise algorithm that I've spoken about previously in other tutorials. And that creates a realistic random noise looking kind of value. So go up to Filter, and we want to go to Render, and clouds or different clouds will work in this case. If we go difference clouds, you're going to retain that strip that we put in there before, Now, we probably don't want that, so let's go down to render and go clouds to get rid of it completely. And you can see here that this image now has some nice white areas and grey areas that go down to black. And it's not purely random. A purely random image would have static across it, noise, like you would see on an old analog television set that has a bad reception. In this case, it's what's called smooth noise. So it's random and yet it's smoothly changing values. It's not instantly going from black to white to black to white to black to white. It's going to give you a nice gradient. Now, if there's not enough black in here for you, you can actually run difference clouds over the top of that. Render difference clouds, which will give you possibly, you could consider this as some rivers or some flat areas or roads that are in your actual map and high mountains around that. Okay, so let's keep that one. So file, save. Go back to Unity and we'll now apply this to our terrain. So we import the image and we find that image, which is on the desktop, raw, open. Need to set that to Mac and go import. And there's the terrain as per our image. Now, if that's a little bit harsh for you, because 600 is quite high, what you can do is go back to the terrain settings, down in the resolution in the inspector where it's got terrain height at 600, put it to like 200, and that will soften it and bring it down. And if that's still too steep, you might want to put 100 and flatten it further. It depends what you want to do with the actual terrain as to how flat and steep those surfaces are. But now you can still see the rivers in here. If we just come back and see all these valleys that have appeared in here, and you could put a first person controller onto that terrain and wander around and have a look at it and change the size from there. Now, once you've also imported that raw image and set your terrain heights, you can still go back to the sculpting tools and work on the terrain itself. So you can still actually, if you want this mountain to be a bit bigger, let's just increase the size and strength of that brush. Let's say this one here. We can still work on it like that. Or if this image is too bumpy for you, you can also use the smooth tool and just apply a bit of smoothing to the terrain so it's not so harsh. But what I find is using the Perlin Noise algorithm through those difference clouds in Photoshop gives you a more realistic terrain than you're going to get if you start trying to do it by hand. And it's a much simpler and nicer process to begin with something like this and then mold it from there. So thanks for listening. In the next tutorial, I'll actually have finished this terrain by putting some color and some trees and things on it. And then we're going to have a look at putting in some clouds.